I still remember the exact moment my father raised his champagne glass at my graduation party. The golden light from the crystal chandeliers poured over the elegant room in Chicago, making everything look like a perfect family portrait. White tablecloths, roses, silver glasses, guests in dark suits, everyone smiling politely as if they were witnessing a proud night. Only I knew that in that room the person least seen was me. My name is Claire Bennett. I had just graduated from nursing school near the top of my class after 4 years of working myself to exhaustion, studying through sleepless nights, and paying every dollar of my tuition on my own. But that night at the party my parents claimed was for me, my name did not appear on the large sign in the center of the hall. It only said in gold lettering, "Congratulations to the Bennett family." Not congratulations to Claire. Not congratulations on your graduation. Just the Bennett family, as if my achievement was only another decoration for their reputation. If you have ever been dismissed by your own family in the moment when you should have been most proud, comment 1. And if you want to hear more painful but honest family stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the end. My father, William Bennett, stood at the head of the room. He was a respected attorney, the kind of man whose silence alone could make other people lower their voices. My mother sat beside my younger sister Sophie, gently fixing a strand of her hair, with the tenderness I had spent years longing for. Sophie wore an expensive turquoise dress while I sat near the back of the room in a navy blue dress I had bought with money from my night shifts. My father tapped lightly against his glass. The room fell silent at once. I lifted my head. A small part of me still hoped he would say something about me. Just one sentence. That he was proud. That he had seen me. But my father did not look at me. He looked at Sophie. He smiled, his voice warm and powerful, just like it was in a courtroom. Tonight I want to raise a glass to the future of the Bennett family. To my youngest daughter Sophie, the one who will carry on our tradition. Applause filled the room. I sat completely still. Then he continued slowly and clearly, as if he wanted every word to sink into my skin. I only wish the one holding the diploma tonight was you, Sophie. You are the only child who has ever truly made me proud. The room did not shatter. No one shouted. No one stood up to object. The most painful part was that everything simply continued as usual. My mother nodded. A few people clapped hesitantly. Some looked down into their glasses to avoid meeting my eyes. And I sat there surrounded by the sound of crystal glasses touching, and finally understood the truth I had been running from for so long. I was not a failed daughter. I was simply the daughter they had never wanted to see. In the Bennett household, love was never expressed through hugs. It was measured by titles, by universities, by the company name printed on a business card, and by what outsiders would think when they heard our last name. From the time I was little, I learned that a good child was not necessarily a kind child. In my parents' eyes, a good child was one who did not step outside the straight line the family had already drawn. My father, William Bennett, had been born in an ordinary neighborhood outside Chicago, but he always told the story of his life, like an indictment against poverty. He studied law on a scholarship, worked in the library until midnight, then climbed step by step until he became a senior partner at a major law firm. He was proud of that, and maybe he had every right to be. But over the years, that pride turned into a cold measuring stick. Anyone who did not rise the way he had was considered weak. My mother, Margaret Bennett, came from an older legal family. My grandfather had been a judge. My uncle was a prosecutor. Two of my aunts worked in prestigious law offices. From Sunday dinners to Christmas parties, every conversation in our home revolved around trials, clients, contracts, law scholarships, or children preparing to enter elite schools. I grew up hearing lines like a Bennett child must know how to argue, and in this family no one chooses an ordinary career. When I was young, I tried to fit into that mold. I wore white shirts for family portraits. I sat quietly at the dinner table listening to my father analyze court cases as if they were bedtime stories. I learned when to nod, when to smile, and how to hide the truth, that none of those things had ever made my heart come alive. What stayed with me was not a victory in a courtroom, but the time my grandmother Ruth told me about the night she held an elderly patient's hand until his final breath. When she told that story, her eyes did not shine with my father's kind of pride. Her eyes were warm. Maybe from very early on I already belonged to a different world. Sophie did not. My younger sister was born as if she had been made to please my parents. She was smart, lively, and always knew how to say exactly what adults wanted to hear. When Sophie was only 16 and said she wanted to study law, my father stood up and hugged her right in the middle of the living room. I remember the sound of my mother crying with happiness. I also remember standing at the foot of the stairs, silently watching the scene, still holding the nursing program brochure. I had not dared to show them. That night I understood a small, painful truth. In the Bennett family, not every dream had the right to be celebrated. I told my parents about nursing on an April evening just after the snow had passed in Chicago. I was 18 years old. In the pocket of my coat was my acceptance letter from Loyola's nursing program, the paper folded so many times that the edges had grown soft because I had opened it and read it over and over again. I had imagined I would tremble with happiness. I had imagined my mother would ask whether the school was far from home, my father would ask about tuition, and Sophie would tease me by saying that finally someone in our family would know how to take care of people, instead of only knowing how to argue. I had imagined they would see the light in my eyes. I was wrong. My father was sitting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, a thick file spread out in front of him. My mother sat beside him, flipping through an interior design magazine. Sophie was lying on the carpet, doing homework and texting at the same time. The scene was so ordinary that it made me believe what I was about to say could also become an ordinary part of our family. I stood in the doorway and said I got accepted into the nursing program. No one answered at first. The ice in my father's glass clicked softly against the crystal. He looked up at me as if he had just heard something completely out of place. Nursing, he asked. Are you serious? I nodded. I want to study to become a nurse. I want to work in a hospital. I think that's where I can truly help people. My father set his glass down on the table. The sound was small, but I still remember it clearly, like the sound of a door closing. He did not get angry right away. First, he laughed a short, dry laugh. Claire, do you really want to spend your whole life following doctor's orders? My mother closed her magazine. Our family has a tradition of law. You know that. I know, I said. But the family tradition does not have to be my entire life. That sentence made the room grow cold. My father looked at me for a long moment. There was no explosive disappointment in his eyes. Only a very quiet kind of contempt. You are wasting the Bennett name, he said. I heard Sophie stop typing on her phone. My mother sighed, exhausted, as if I had ruined the evening on purpose. I am not wasting anything, I said. I am just choosing a different profession. No, my father replied. You are choosing a lower position. Do not confuse the two. I stood completely still. The letter in my pocket suddenly felt as heavy as stone. I wanted to take it out. I wanted to tell them that the program was hard to get into, that I had earned that acceptance through my own ability. But looking at my father's face, I knew every explanation would be twisted into something small and pitiful. That night I went upstairs, placed the acceptance letter on my desk, and stared at it for a long time. I did not cry right away. I only felt something inside me quietly crack. From that moment on, I understood that the path I had chosen would not only lead me to a hospital, it would also lead me out from under my family's shadow. After that evening, no one in the house mentioned my acceptance letter again. It disappeared from every conversation like an object deliberately pushed into the back of a closet. My father still talked about his trials. My mother still talked about families whose children had gotten into prestigious law schools. Sophie began being taken to gatherings for young lawyers, and I learned how to prepare everything on my own. I applied for scholarships, filled out student loan forms, found a cheap room near campus, and took part-time shifts at the hospital cafe. Some days I stood for 8 hours straight, my feet aching so badly that when I got back to my room I wanted to sit on the floor and cry. But the next morning I still arrived in class on time. I still studied every medication, every emergency procedure, every tiny sign that could decide whether a person lived or died. I used to think that if I just did better, my parents would change. If I got high grades, they would ask about me. If a professor praised me, they would become curious. If my name appeared on the honors list, they would feel proud. But every time I called home, the conversation always turned back to Sophie. Sophie had won a debate competition. Sophie had been praised by a law professor. Sophie might apply to Harvard. Her name was said so often that I began to feel as if I were only a paid listener for my parents' pride. But there was still one person who did not forget me. My grandmother, Ruth Whitaker, called me every Sunday night. Never late. Sometimes she only asked whether I had eaten. Sometimes she made me tell her about my first clinical shift, my first patient, the first time I was so nervous that I dropped my pen in the examination room. She never laughed at me. She listened as if every small detail of my life deserved to be kept. She had been a nurse for more than 40 years. She said, nursing was not only about changing bandages, taking blood pressure, or writing charts. It was about standing beside another human being when they were at their weakest and not letting them feel abandoned. Once, after a difficult clinical shift, I called her close to midnight. An elderly patient had just passed away, and I could not forget the look in his daughter's eyes when she walked into the room. I told my grandmother that maybe I was not strong enough for this profession. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Claire, only people who feel nothing do not cry. You hurt because you still know how to care. Do not let anyone turn that heart into a weakness." I carried those words with me through the years that followed. When my father did not come to my scholarship ceremony, when my mother forgot the day I received my clinical commendation, when Sophie was celebrated by the whole family just because of a summer internship letter, I kept going, not because it did not hurt, but because every Sunday night there was still a voice reminding me that I was not invisible. 2 months before graduation, I received an email from my mother. There was no greeting, no question about whether I was exhausted after my final clinical placement, and not a single line saying she was proud of me. The subject line was simply, "Saturday dinner party plan." I opened it in the school library, surrounded by students preparing for exams, and the smell of cold coffee. The email was chillingly short. The graduation party would be held at Sterling Restaurant at 7 in the evening. Your father has finalized the guest list. You do not need to worry about anything. I read those lines over and over again, still trying to convince myself that this was my mother's way of caring. Maybe she wanted to make things easier for me. Maybe my father finally wanted to do something kind. But the longer I stared at the email, the more I noticed a strange emptiness. No one had asked whom I wanted to invite. No one had asked what place I liked. No one had asked whether I wanted a big party or just a small dinner with the people who had truly walked beside me through those 4 years. At the bottom of the email was an attachment, the guest list. I clicked on it. 53 names appeared on the screen. I recognized a few distant relatives, people who only saw me during holidays and often confused me with Sophie when we were children. The rest were my father's colleagues, partners from his law firm, the spouses of important clients, my mother's friends from charity circles, and a few of Sophie's college friends. I went through the list line by line, waiting to see Professor Elena Brooks, the woman who had stayed after class to help me get through the hardest clinical course. Her name was not there. I looked for Maya, my roommate, who had taken me to the emergency room when I collapsed from overworking. She was not there. I looked for Gloria, the first nurse mentor, who once told me I had very steady hands. She was not there either. I called my mother immediately. Mom, can I invite a few of my own people? Professor Brooks, Maya? Some people from the hospital? They matter to me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then my mother spoke in that soft but distant voice she always used when she wanted to end a conversation without allowing an argument. Claire, this is an opportunity for our family to make a good impression. Your friends probably would not fit the atmosphere. I tightened my grip on the phone. What does that mean, they would not fit? You know what I mean. Your father's guests are people from our circle. We need to maintain a certain level of formality. I wanted to say that the people who held patients' hands during night shifts carried more dignity than any expensive suit in that room. But my throat closed before I could speak. That evening, the invitation was sent to my email for review. Cream background, gold lettering, elegant floral details. At the top it said, "Celebrating the Bennett family." I stared at it for a very long time. And for the first time I understood that the party had never truly been for me. From the day I received the invitation, I began noticing more of the things I had once tried to ignore. Every phone call home had one thing in common. My mother did not ask how I was preparing for graduation. She did not ask whether I had received my cap and gown. She did not ask whether I needed anyone to pick me up. She only talked about ordering more flowers, choosing the right wine for the main course, and reminding me not to wear anything too eye-catching. You should choose something subtle, my mother said. There will be many important people there that night. I wanted to ask, am I important? But the question stayed trapped behind my teeth like so many other questions in my life. A week later, Sophie video called me. She was in her bedroom with 2 dresses hanging on the closet door behind her. One was silver. One was turquoise. She turned the phone around and asked me which one she should wear to the party. Why are you choosing your dress so carefully? I asked, trying to keep my voice normal. Sophie laughed, a little embarrassed. Because Dad said he might introduce me to a few people that night. Some of his partners went to Harvard, and they want to hear about my plans. Is that still? On the table in front of me were my notes for final exams, pages filled with my own cramped handwriting. I had stayed awake for 3 nights in a row, preparing for my final clinical test. And yet at my graduation party, the person being prepared to shine was Sophie. Did Dad say anything else, I asked? Sophie hesitated for a second. He said this would be a good chance for the family to show everyone the real future of Bennett. The real future? I heard those words and felt a chill move down my spine. In my father's mind, I was not the future. I was an unnecessary parenthesis, a small mistake in the family's perfect resume. Sophie did not mean to hurt me. I knew that, but her innocence became another cut. She was so used to being placed in the center of the light that she did not realize the light had been taken from someone else. That evening, I drove back to my small apartment in silence. The streets of Chicago were wet after a late rain, car lights stretching into long streaks across the pavement. I stopped in the parking lot, but I did not get out right away. I sat there with my hands still resting on the steering wheel, and for the first time allowed myself to look directly at the truth. I had waited 4 years for my parents to see me. I had believed my diploma would be heavy enough to place on the family scale. But they did not need my diploma. They only needed a party, a room full of important people, and a polite reason to talk about Sophie. The most painful thing was not that they were not proud. The most painful thing was that they had prepared an entire evening to prove it in front of everyone. That night I barely slept. I lay on the narrow bed in my small apartment, staring up at the dark ceiling, my mind circling the same question over and over again. If my own parents had already decided to turn me into a shadow on my day, what was the point of pretending to be happy? At almost 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed once, then went silent. An unknown number had left a voicemail. At first, I did not plan to listen to it. I was too exhausted to take in anything else. But somehow my hand still tapped it open. Hello, this is the recruitment office at Presbyterian Memorial Hospital. This message is for Ems. Claire Bennett. We have important information we would like to discuss with you directly. Please call us back when convenient. I sat up immediately. Presbyterian Memorial was not an ordinary hospital. It was the place nursing students across Illinois dreamed of, the place where only the strongest applicants even had a chance to interview. I had applied there almost only so I would not regret not trying. I never thought they would call me back, and I certainly did not expect them to leave a message so late at night. The next morning, the receptionist told me that Dr. Nathan Cole, the director of recruitment, wanted to meet me in person. Not for an interview. Not for another review of my file. He wanted to meet me to tell me something important. I hung up with my palms damp with sweat. The first person I called was my grandmother, Ruth. Grandma, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you know Dr. Nathan Cole at Presbyterian Memorial? There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then she gave a soft laugh. Yes. I worked with him on the community health board for many years. My heart beat harder. What did you tell him about me? I told him the truth, she replied. That my granddaughter is one of the most dedicated nursing students I have ever known. That you do not only have excellent grades, but also something many people cannot be taught: the ability to stay beside others when they are afraid. I could not say anything. For the past 4 years, I had grown so used to having my achievements ignored that hearing someone name my worth out loud almost hurt. Claire, she continued, your parents may not understand this profession, but that does not make this profession smaller. And it certainly does not make you smaller. I looked at the invitation on the table. The words celebrating the Bennett family still sat there coldly. But for the first time, I no longer felt trapped inside them. Another door was opening. A door that did not need my father's permission. If you were Claire, would you leave quietly or stay and make them see the truth? Comment 1 if you would choose silence, and comment 2 if you would choose to face them. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to follow the emotional twist that comes next. 3 days before the party, I drove to my parents' house. The house was still spotless, spacious, and so cold that the sound of my shoes touching the wooden floor felt like someone knocking against the inside of my chest. My mother was in the dining room checking tablecloths and floral arrangements. My father was in his study behind his large wooden desk, like a judge who never left his seat. I stood outside the door for a moment before knocking softly. Come in, my father said, his eyes still on the file in front of him. I stepped inside. Dad, I want to talk about the party. He did not look up. What about it? I want to invite a few people who matter to me. Professor Brooks Maya, and some people from the hospital. They have been with me through these past 4 years. My father turned another page. The guest list is finalized, but this is my graduation party. Only then did he look up. His eyes were calm, but there was no tenderness in them. This is a Bennett family event. You need to understand the difference. I swallowed. Then what am I in this event? He leaned back in his chair as if my question exhausted him. Claire, do not turn everything into a tragedy. You will be there. People will congratulate you. And that night will also be a good opportunity for us to talk about Sophie's future. I could hear my own heartbeat. You are planning to announce Sophie's Harvard news at my party. She has been strongly recommended by an old professor of mine. This is the right time for people to understand how far she is going to go. And what about me? My father was silent for a beat. Then he spoke very softly. You chose nursing, Claire. I cannot create prestige out of an ordinary choice. I thought I had grown used to his contempt. But that sentence still made my throat tighten. I left the study and found my mother in the dining room. She was adjusting each white petal inside a glass vase. Mom, I said, can you help me talk to Dad? Just this once. Let this party truly be mine. My mother looked at me more tired than sympathetic. Claire, your father only wants what is best for the family. By erasing me from my own graduation, you are being too sensitive again. I laughed, but the sound was dry and painful. Every time I am hurt, you call it sensitivity. Every time Dad looks down on me, you call it a misunderstanding. Has there ever been a moment when you called it by its real name? My mother's hand paused over the flowers. For one brief moment, I thought she understood. But then she lowered her gaze again. Do not ruin the party, Claire. That sentence closed everything. I looked at my mother, then at the study door behind me. For the first time, I no longer wanted to convince them. I had come there hoping they would finally see me. I left with a different truth. Some people only open their eyes when they lose the power to keep you silent. The next morning, I went to Presbyterian Memorial, wearing the white shirt I had ironed the night before, and a pair of shoes still new enough to keep me from feeling out of place. The hospital building stood tall and bright, its glass windows reflecting the gray Chicago sky. I stood in front of the revolving doors for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and walked in as if I were crossing a line that had been waiting for me for a long time. Doctor. Nathan Cole met me in a small office overlooking the emergency department. He did not make me feel like I was being interviewed. He made me feel welcomed. On his desk was my file filled with professor comments, clinical evaluations, recommendation letters, and transcripts. Claire, he said, we have been following your records since your winter placement. Not many students can earn high marks and still make patients remember their name, the way you do. I sat still, both hands resting on my knees. I was used to hearing people speak about Sophie with pride. I was not used to hearing someone speak about me that way. He slid an envelope toward me. Presbyterian Memorial would like to invite you to join our emergency department nursing team. A full-time position. Starting salary of $78,000 a year. For a moment, every sound seemed to move far away. I looked at the number on the paper, then at my name, beneath the offer letter heading. Claire Bennett. Registered nurse. Not the daughter who had taken the wrong path. Not the one who had embarrassed the Bennett name. Just me with my effort written clearly on white paper. Doctor, Cole added, we would also like to present this offer letter in a formal setting if you agree. Your achievement deserves to be recognized publicly. I thought about the party at Sterling. I thought about the sign without my name on it. I thought about Sophie in her turquoise dress, my father raising his glass, my mother lowering her eyes to keep the peace. This Saturday, I said slowly, my family is holding a graduation party for me. He looked at me a little longer, as if he understood what had not been said. Then that would be the most fitting place. I did not tell him every detail. I only said that my family did not see nursing as an achievement worth being proud of. Doctor. Cole did not seem surprised. He closed the file and said, sometimes people look down on something until it stands in front of them with its full value. When I left the hospital, I held the envelope with both hands. Outside, the wind was cold, but for the first time in weeks, I did not feel myself trembling. I called Grandma Ruth. She did not ask many questions. She simply listened as I told her everything, then said, you do not need revenge, Claire. Just let the truth walk in at the right moment. I looked at the cars moving along the avenue, and I understood that was exactly what I would do. No shouting. No begging. No ruining the party. I would come sit at the table they had chosen for me and listen to whatever they wanted to say. Then when the door opened, they would have to see the person they had tried so hard to forget. On Saturday night, I arrived at Sterling on time. The restaurant was near downtown Chicago, with tall glass doors, polished stone floors, and crystal chandeliers that made everything look like an expensive advertisement. Champagne glasses were lined up in rows. Cream roses sat at the center of every table. The atmosphere was so formal that a person could almost forget this was supposed to be a graduation party. I stood at the entrance, looking at the room decorated for my day, and still could not find any trace of myself in it. None of the colors I liked. None of my nursing school friends. No Professor Brooks. None of the people who had once seen me so exhausted that I fell asleep, sitting up. My father was shaking hands with a silver-haired man. When he saw me, his smile did not disappear. It only shifted slightly, as if I were a detail that had appeared earlier than expected. "Claire," he said, "you're here. Not you. Look beautiful. Not I'm glad you came. Just you're here." My mother walked over from the main table holding a stack of place cards. "You're sitting at the table in the back near the window," she said. "The front table is for your father's partners." I looked at her. Am I not important? My mother froze for the slightest moment, then gave me a thin smile. "Do not start tonight, Claire." I walked toward the table near the back of the room. My name was on a small card, placed between two distant relatives, whose faces I barely remembered. From there, I could see the main table clearly. Sophie sat in the center, her turquoise dress making her stand out under the lights. My mother adjusted her necklace, while my father leaned in and said something that made her laugh. On the large wall behind the main table, the gold-lettered sign still hung there. "Congratulations to the Bennett family." More guests arrived. They walked past me. Some gave me polite nods. Many did not know who I was. I heard them asking one another about my father's law firm, about Sophie's Harvard application. My name appeared now and then as a brief explanation, and then the conversation immediately moved on to something else. At 7:15, the restaurant doors opened again. Grandma Ruth walked in. She wore a navy suit, her silver hair neatly styled, her back straight, and her eyes so calm that the whole room seemed to rearrange itself around her presence. My father saw her first. His jaw tightened. "Ruth," he said, stepping forward to block her way. "I do not remember sending you an invitation." She smiled. "And I do not remember needing your permission to attend my granddaughter's graduation party." My mother hurried over. "Mom, please do not make things tense." "Margaret," Grandma Ruth said, "I have only just walked in. If my presence makes things tense, perhaps the problem is not my presence." Then she walked straight toward me. When she hugged me, the room suddenly felt less cold. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. I looked over her shoulder and saw my father trying to smile at the guests, while my mother avoided my eyes. "Not yet," I whispered. "But I will be soon." Grandma Ruth squeezed my hand. "Good. Then tonight, sit with your back straight." I did exactly what she said. I sat with my back straight and waited for them to say everything themselves. After dinner, my father stood up. Just one light tap against the side of his glass was enough to make the small conversations fade and then stop completely. That had always been William Bennett's talent. He knew how to make a room believe that whatever he was about to say was worth hearing. I placed both hands under the table, my fingers tightly laced together. Grandma Ruth sat beside me, silent but steady as an anchor. I had told myself not to expect anything anymore. And yet when my father looked around the room, a very small part of me still waited for him to say my name. He did not. "Thank you all for coming tonight," my father said. This is an important occasion for the Bennett family, a family that has always believed in tradition, honor, and the future. Sophie sat up straighter at the main table. My mother gently placed a hand on her shoulder. My father spoke about 3 generations of attorneys, about a reputation built on intellect and discipline. He spoke so smoothly that anyone who did not know the truth would have thought this was a beautiful night. Then he turned toward Sophie. "Tonight I especially want to raise a glass to my youngest daughter," he said. "Sophie is preparing to step onto the path our family has always valued. She has courage, ambition, and a very bright future." Applause filled the room. Sophie smiled, but this time her smile was not complete. Maybe she sensed that something was wrong. Maybe she did not. I no longer had the strength to guess. My father lifted his glass higher. "Claire has also had a memorable day," he said, finally mentioning my name. My whole body went stiff. But if I am speaking honestly, I wish the person holding the diploma tonight were Sophie. She is the child who makes me believe the future of the Bennett family is still intact. The air in the room changed, not with a loud sound, but with a silence that fell over every table. A fork touched a plate softly. Someone coughed once, then stopped. A woman at the front table turned to look at her husband. My mother kept nodding, but the smile on her lips was stretched like a thread about to snap. I looked at the glass of water in front of me. Its clear surface reflected my face, small and pale, almost as if I did not exist. "If your father said that in front of the whole family, would you get up and leave or stay until the very end? Comment 1 if you would leave, and comment 2 if you would stay. And if this story makes your throat tighten, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the ending." I did not stand up. Not because I was weak, but because for the first time I understood that there are moments when a person does not need to run from humiliation. They only need to stay long enough for the truth to have time to walk in. My father continued, raising his glass. "To Sophie. To the future of the Bennett family." A few people clapped slowly and out of rhythm. Others only lifted their glasses out of politeness. I did not touch mine. Neither did Grandma Ruth. Then she placed her napkin down on the table. The sound was very small, but to me it sounded like the final door opening. Grandma Ruth stood up very slowly. She was not hurried, not trembling, and she did not need to raise her voice. The simple act of her leaving her chair was enough to make the uneven applause die out completely. In a room full of lawyers, partners, and people who made a living through argument, my grandmother needed only a few seconds of silence to reclaim the attention my father thought he owned. "William," she said, her voice frighteningly calm, "I think you have just forgotten the real reason for tonight." My father turned toward her, the smile still on his face, though his eyes had gone cold. "Ruth, please. This is not the time." "No," she replied. "This is exactly the time." My mother stood up suddenly, her chair scraping softly against the stone floor. "Mom, please do not make this uncomfortable." Grandma Ruth looked at her daughter. There was no anger in her eyes, but there was so much sadness that I had to look down. "Margaret, you have allowed this to be uncomfortable for far too long. Tonight, I am only calling it by its real name." A murmur moved through the tables. My father set his glass down, trying to keep his composure. "This is a family matter." "No," Grandma Ruth said. "You made it public the moment you stood in front of everyone and said you wished another child had been the one holding the diploma. You did not only hurt Claire. You used her own day to prove that in your eyes she was not worthy enough to be proud of." I saw Sophie's shoulders shrink. She looked down at the table, her fingers twisting into her napkin. For the first time that evening, the light on her no longer looked like glory. It looked like weight. My father gave a dry laugh. "You have always been dramatic. Perhaps nursing made you too used to excessive emotion." The room went completely silent again. Grandma Ruth's expression did not change. I worked as a nurse for more than 40 years, William. I stood beside the poor, the wealthy judges, doctors, lawyers, newborns, and the dying. When people are in pain, their business cards do not save them. The person who stays beside them does. A man at the front table nodded slightly. I recognized him as one of my father's senior partners. My father saw it too, and for the first time the confidence on his face cracked. Claire worked twice as hard as everyone else to pay her own tuition, Grandma Ruth continued. She graduated near the top of her class. Her professors praised her. Patients remembered her name. Her colleagues respected her. But at her own party, you seated her at the back table, left her name off the sign, and raised your glass to Sophie. My mother, whispered Mom, that is enough. No, Grandma Ruth replied. It is not enough. At that exact moment, the restaurant doors opened. A man in a gray suit stepped inside. He was not tall in an intimidating way, but his stride was steady, his eyes were clear, and he carried a large envelope sealed with the hospital's mark. A server moved as if to ask what he needed, but the man only gave a polite smile and walked straight toward the private dining room. My father frowned. Excuse me, who are you? The man stopped in the middle of the room, turned toward my father, then looked at me. I apologize for arriving late, he said, his voice strong enough for the entire room to hear. I am Dr. Nathan Cole, Director of Recruitment at Presbyterian Memorial Hospital. I am here to see Ems. Claire Bennett. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. In that moment, I was no longer the girl seated at the back table. I was no longer the name left off the sign. I stood up, my heart pounding, while Grandma Ruth placed a gentle hand on my back as if to tell me I did not need to be afraid. Doctor. Cole stepped forward and extended his hand. Ems. Bennett, he said, tonight our hospital has the honor of recognizing your achievement. My father looked at the envelope in his hand, then looked at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw that he had no idea what was happening. Doctor. Nathan Cole did not stand beside my father. He stood beside me. That single detail was enough for the entire room to understand that the power of the evening had shifted. The man my father had not invited was holding something my father had never prepared. Ladies and gentlemen, Doctor. Cole said, I apologize for interrupting. But this is Claire Bennett's graduation party. Her achievement deserves to be spoken aloud in this very room. My father stepped forward. Doctor. Cole, perhaps you do not understand the situation. On the contrary, Doctor. Cole replied. I believe I understand it quite well. He opened the envelope. The sound of paper was so clear that it felt like a door opening inside my chest. Claire Bennett has graduated from nursing school with outstanding results, ranking among the top students in her class. Her clinical record is one of the most impressive our recruitment board has received. Not only because of her grades, but because of the way she remains calm when patients are afraid. A murmur rose through the room. Esther. Harris, my father's older partner, set down his glass. Dr. Cole continued, Presbyterian Memorial Hospital officially invites Claire Bennett to join our emergency department as a full-time registered nurse with a starting salary of $78,000 a year, along with a nomination for our Young Healthcare Leadership Program. The air froze. My father blinked. My mother lifted a hand to her throat. Sophie looked at me, no longer confused, but genuinely stunned. A man whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, $78,000 for a new nurse. Doctor. Cole turned toward him. For an exceptional nurse. And for a fair comparison, many junior lawyers at major firms start below that number. That sentence struck the place where my father's pride lived. For years he had used money, titles, and reputation to measure my worth. Now that same measuring stick had turned back toward him, cold and undeniable. But Doctor. Cole was not finished. He took out a second sheet of paper. I would like to read a passage from Dean Amelia Grant's letter. She wrote, Claire Bennett is one of those rare students who naturally combines academic ability, clinical discipline, and compassion. During the most difficult shifts, she does not try to stand out. She tries to make patients less afraid. I lowered my head, not because I was ashamed, because if I looked up, I was afraid the tears would fall. Grandma Ruth stood beside me, her shoulders straight, her eyes bright. There, she said. That is the granddaughter you seated at the back table. Applause broke out. At first, it was only a few people, then it spread across the room. It was not the polite applause Sophie had received earlier. This time, it had weight. It reached me like a long overdue confirmation. I turned toward my parents. Thank you, Doctor. Cole. Thank you, Grandma. I spent years thinking that if I was good enough, obedient enough, silent enough, my parents would be proud of me. Tonight, I finally understand that the problem was never that I was not enough. The problem was that you only wanted to see a version of me that fit the family reputation. My father opened his mouth. Claire, you are making this bigger than it is. No, I said. I am just speaking for the first time without asking permission. I looked at the gold sign behind them. From today on, I will not beg to be loved by making myself smaller. I will not let anyone call contempt expectation, call my mother's silence keeping the peace, or call my pain sensitivity. My mother began to cry, but I did not rush to comfort her the way I always had. My father stood there in front of the people who had once respected him, unable to find a sentence polished enough to cover the truth. And I, for the first time in my life, no longer needed his recognition. The party ended faster than anyone had expected. The guests who had arrived with polite smiles began leaving in silence. In the hallway, they picked up their coats and spoke to one another in voices, low but not low enough for me to miss. I had no idea William treated his daughter that way. That girl is truly impressive. Presbyterian Memorial is not easy to get into. $78,000 for a first position, and in the emergency department too. I stood near the door, still holding Dr. Cole's envelope. The people who had not known who I was earlier were suddenly looking at me as if I truly existed. I only felt sad because sometimes people need a title, a salary, before they are willing to believe someone's pain has weight. My father stood in the corner of the room. He was no longer the man controlling the space. He was just a man in an expensive suit, watching his partners avoid his eyes. My mother wiped her tears, but she did not look toward me. Maybe she was not ashamed because she had hurt me. Maybe she was ashamed because other people had seen it. Esther. Harris stopped in front of me. Claire, congratulations. Your achievement is remarkable. If you ever need a recommendation, advice, or simply someone to confirm that tonight you stood with dignity, call me. When he left, I saw Sophie still sitting at the main table. Her turquoise dress glowed under the lights that were slowly being turned down, but her face was pale. After a while, she stood and walked toward me. Claire, she said softly, are you okay? I almost laughed, but then I saw that her eyes were red. Not the redness of someone whose spotlight had been stolen. It was the redness of someone who had just realized she had been standing on a stage that never belonged to her. I don't know, I answered. But I feel lighter than I did when I walked in. Sophie lowered her head. I didn't know it was that bad. Did you not see it, or did you not need to see it? The question made her fall silent. I no longer wanted to wrap the truth in soft paper. Maybe both, Sophie whispered. I got used to Mom and Dad looking at me. I never asked how it felt for you when they did not look at you. I looked at her for a long time. Sophie was only 19. She had not created that house, but she had grown up in the light that had been taken from me. That did not make her a villain, but it did not make my wound disappear either. I don't want to hate you, I said. But if we are still going to be sisters, you have to learn to see me as my own person. Not as your shadow. Sophie nodded. I want to start over. Even if it has to be slowly. If you believe that sometimes walking away from disrespect is not being ungrateful, but saving yourself, comment the word boundary. And if you want to hear more stories about family delayed justice and growing stronger, please subscribe to the channel. I did not hug Sophie right away. I only placed my hand on her shoulder. Some relationships cannot heal in one night. But at least that night, for the first time, she did not ask me to become smaller so she could shine brighter. 3 months after the night at Sterling, my life did not become perfect. It simply became more honest. I moved into a small apartment near Presbyterian Memorial. Every morning I put on my blue scrubs, clipped my employee badge to my chest, and walked to the hospital through the Chicago cold. On that badge was my name. Claire Bennett Erin. Every time I looked at it, I remembered how I had once begged to be seen by people who did not want to see me. My first shift in the emergency department exhausted me so completely that I got home too tired to eat dinner. But it was a different kind of exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of trying to prove I was worthy of love, but the exhaustion of doing something meaningful. I held the hands of people who were afraid, ran toward emergency calls, and learned how to stay calm between the sounds of breathing machines and hurried footsteps. Some days I cried in the break room. Some days I smiled because a patient remembered my name. My father did not call me. Grandma Ruth told me that his reputation at the law firm had suffered and that a few clients had chosen to work with someone else. In the past, that might have made me feel guilty. But now I understood. I did not embarrass him. I only stopped covering for him. My mother texted a few times. I answered politely, but I did not open the door too wide. I was not ready to forgive someone who had stayed silent for too long and then called that silence keeping the peace. Sophie was different. She called me every Sunday. At first, the calls were awkward. She asked about the hospital, about my shifts, about what I loved most in my work. Sometimes, both of us fell silent. But she was trying, so I left a small crack in the door too. Grandma Ruth still visited me every week, bringing cinnamon cookies and stories from the old hospital. One afternoon, she looked out at the city lights and said, "Not everyone born into your family is truly your home." I nodded. I had learned that in the most painful way. Family is not a place where you must become smaller so someone else can feel proud. Family is where people see you even before you have a title or an achievement big enough for them to show off. That night, my phone buzzed. Sophie asked if I was still free to call that Sunday. Grandma Ruth said she had left extra cookies in the refrigerator. Gloria told me that a patient had asked where Nurse Claire was because I had made her feel less afraid. I smiled. A peaceful smile. My father had wanted me invisible. My mother had wanted me silent. But I did not become what they needed in order to feel comfortable. I became someone I could respect. That night at Sterling, I did not defeat my parents. I simply stopped losing the battle against my own disappearance. And sometimes that is the only victory a person truly needs.